The moment Daniel Carter saw his boss standing in her private office blazer, clutched against her chest, a jagged scar running across her right side, he knew his career was over. What he couldn't have known was how this mortifying accident would completely transform his life, hers and the little girl waiting at home who'd already lost too much. 5:30 in the morning arrived with the cruel reliability of a debt collector. Dan stood before his refrigerator in the cramped Lincoln Park apartment, staring at empty shelves where milk should have been. Sophie needed milk for her cereal. Sophie always needed milk for her cereal, and he'd forgotten to stop at the store last night because he'd been elbow deep in marketing projections until 11. The photograph on the mantel caught his eye as he turned Sarah on their wedding day sunshine, in her smile no shadow of the cancer that would take her 3 years later. Her last words still echoed in the quiet mornings. "Take care of our girl, Danny." He was trying. God, he was trying. Sophie appeared in the doorway, 6 years old, with her mother's unruly brown curls and a pink ballet leotard already stretched over her small frame. The recital was 3 weeks away, 3 weeks from today. His chest tightened as the realization settled like lead in his stomach the same day as the Henderson presentation. The biggest pitch of his career and his daughter's moment in the spotlight, scheduled for the exact same Friday afternoon. "Daddy, today's the last practice before the big show. I'm the lead swan." The pride in her voice made something crack inside him. He knelt down eye level with those big brown eyes that were so much like Sarah's, it hurt to look at them sometimes. "Sweetheart, that's amazing. You've worked so hard. You'll be there right front row like you promised." The lie formed on his tongue before his brain could stop it. "I'll do my very best, princess." Her face fell just slightly, that flicker of doubt that no 6-year-old should have to carry. She'd learned not to trust promises anymore. He'd taught her that one missed event at a time. 7 o'clock brought Maggie O'Sullivan's familiar knock. The 70-year-old neighbor had become their lifeline since Sarah's funeral, her Irish-American warmth filling gaps Dan couldn't seem to close on his own. Silver hair pulled back in a practical bun, she surveyed the chaos of his kitchen with eyes that had seen enough of life to know when not to judge. "Danny boy, you look like death warmed over." Big project at work, 3 weeks to pull off a miracle. Maggie's weathered hand rested on his shoulder, the gesture carrying more weight than words. "A man needs help sometimes. Don't be too proud to ask for it." But pride wasn't the issue, fear was. Fear that if he admitted he couldn't handle single parenthood and a demanding career, someone might decide Sophie deserved better than a father who survived on 4 hours of sleep and microwave dinners. The commute into downtown Chicago gave him 37 minutes to transform from exhausted single dad into competent marketing executive. The L train rattled through morning fog Lake Michigan, a gray smudge beyond the buildings. He rehearsed responses to questions he knew Catherine Williams would ask, imagining her steel gray eyes dissecting every slide, every projection, every word choice. Meridian Corporation occupied floors 20 through 30 of a glass tower that reflected the city's ambitions back at itself. Dan's security badge granted access at 8:07, exactly 7 minutes late, which put him right on schedule for his perpetual tardiness. Amy Richardson glanced up from her cubicle, sympathy written across her features. "Carter, the Ice Queen's looking for you." Is she angry? When is she not? Catherine Williams had earned her nickname through 5 years of ruthless efficiency as the youngest CEO in Meridian's 70-year history. No one had seen her smile. No one knew anything about her personal life. She existed solely within these walls, a force of nature contained in tailored suits and French twists, demanding excellence from everyone because she demanded it from herself first. Dan had been working directly under her for 6 months, and while he respected her business acumen, he found her coldness difficult. She had never once asked about his personal circumstances, despite his occasional need to leave early for Lily's doctor appointments or school events. He'd learned to schedule those things during lunch breaks or to take personal days rather than ask for flexibility. Dan knocked on her office door at 8:15, mentally preparing for the verbal precision strike that would follow. "You're late." Her voice carried the temperature of a Chicago winter. "I apologize, Ms. Williams. This morning there was—" "I don't need excuses, Mr. Carter. I need results." She didn't look up from her MacBook fingers moving across the keyboard with mechanical efficiency. The view behind her stretched across the Chicago River morning light, turning the water bronze. But Catherine Williams existed in a world that didn't include scenery, only outcomes. I have something that requires your immediate attention. She slid a folder across the mahogany desk, her movements precise as surgery. Henderson Manufacturing, $50 million. dollars. They're considering a long-term marketing partnership and they're meeting with Peterson Industries in New York next month. Dan opened the folder, his pulse quickening as he scanned the figures. Henderson was the largest industrial supplier in the Midwest, the kind of account that could define a career. The board presentation is in 3 weeks. I need a comprehensive strategy that proves we can handle an account of this magnitude. 3 weeks. The same 3 weeks before Sophie's recital. The universe, it seemed, had a cruel sense of timing. 3 weeks is aggressive for a project this size. Her eyes finally lifted from the screen, and Dan felt the full weight of her attention like a physical force. Can't handle it, Mr. Carter. I can do it. I don't want can. I want excellence. She leaned back in her chair, studying him with an intensity that made him want to check if his tie was straight. This company's future depends on this project. The board is considering a merger with Peterson. If we land Henderson, we prove we're strong enough to stand independent. If we fail, we lose everything. The stakes crystallized in his mind, not just his job, but the entire company. 2,000 employees whose livelihoods rested on his ability to put together a presentation good enough to impress a board of directors who'd rather sell than fight. I understand, Ms. Williams. You won't be disappointed. See that I'm not. She returned to her screen, the dismissal implicit. Close the door on your way out. Marcus Webb intercepted him 3 steps from his cubicle, 42 years of accumulated bitterness, compressed into a forced smile. Carter, heard you got the Henderson account. News travels fast. Why I've been here 8 years. You're just a junior executive who can't even show up on time. Because she sees something in me I don't see in myself, Dan thought, but didn't say. I don't know, Marcus. I just do the work. Yeah, well, the Ice Queens never picked favorites before. Must be your lucky day. Amy appeared at his elbow once Marcus stalked away, her voice low. Don't let him get to you. You earned this. But had he, Dan stared at the Henderson folder, 3 weeks of 14-hour days compressed into manila and paper clips. 3 weeks of missing bedtimes and forgotten promises, and Sophie's face falling just a little bit more each time he chose work over her. The first week dissolved into a blur of market research and competitive analysis. Dan arrived at 6:30 in the morning and left at 10 at night, fueled by coffee from the break room and the desperate hope that success might justify the sacrifice. Maggie picked Sophie up from school, fed her dinner, helped with homework, all the things a father should do, but couldn't when presentations demanded perfection. Thursday evening, his phone buzzed during a strategy session. Sophie's name lit up the screen, and guilt twisted in his chest like a knife. Hey, princess, what's up? Daddy, you said you'd be home for dinner. I made you a picture. He glanced at his watch. 7:45. Dinner had been 2 hours ago. Sweetheart, I'm so sorry. This project is really important, but I'll make it up to you this weekend, okay? The silence on the other end spoke volumes. Finally, you always say that. The line went dead. Dan stared at his phone, the market research swimming before his eyes, and wondered when he'd become the kind of father who made promises he couldn't keep, the kind Sarah had made him swear he'd never be. But rent didn't pay itself. Medical bills from Sarah's final months still arrived with clockwork cruelty. Sophie's school supplies and ballet lessons, and the simple dignity of not having to choose between new shoes and groceries, all of that required money. Money required keeping this job. Keeping this job required sacrificing everything else. Late Friday night, long after the office had emptied, Dan found himself walking past Catherine Williams's office on the way to the elevator. Light spilled from under her door. He paused, curiosity overcoming exhaustion, and glanced through the glass. She sat alone at her desk, one hand massaging her right shoulder, her face twisted in a pain she'd never showed during business hours. A pill bottle sat beside her water glass, the label too far away to read. For just a moment, the Ice Queen looked human, vulnerable, alone in a tower of glass and steel with nothing but work to keep her company. Dan turned away before she could catch him watching, but the image lingered. Everyone assumed Catherine Williams had no life outside Meridian, because she chose not to. But what if it wasn't choice? What if she was just as trapped as he was using work to fill a void that couldn't be filled? The second week brought Marcus's sabotage. Dan discovered it Monday morning when he opened his presentation file to find half the data mysteriously corrupted. 18 hours of work gone. Marcus's smile from across the office carried the smugness of plausible deniability. Catherine summoned him at 9:15, her expression carved from ice. The Henderson data has errors. I know, I'm fixing it. Data backup is basic competency, Mr. Carter. If you can't manage fundamental protocols, it won't happen again. See that it doesn't. You have until Wednesday to rebuild what was lost. 48 hours. Dan worked through Monday night, dozed at his desk for 3 hours. Tuesday morning, then dove back in. Maggie called at 6 on Tuesday evening, her voice careful. Danny, Sophie's asking when you'll be home. Tell her soon. Tell her I love her. She knows you love her boy, but love isn't enough when a child needs their father. The rebuke stung because it was true. He hung up and stared at spreadsheets that blurred together, numbers that mattered to everyone, except the one person who mattered most. Wednesday morning, Catherine reviewed his rebuilt presentation without comment, her silence somehow worse than criticism. She flipped through slides with mechanical precision, her face revealing nothing. This is acceptable. Not good, not impressive. Acceptable. Dan waited for elaboration that never came. Your daughter. Catherine's voice cut through his exhaustion. How old is she? The question jarred him from his fog. 6. Why? Just wondering what drives a man to work these hours. She closed the presentation folder, her gray eyes studying him with unsettling focus. You have family obligations. I understand that. I manage. Do you? The question wasn't cruel, just curious. Single parenting can't be easy. How did she know he was single? Dan had never mentioned Sophie at work, had kept his personal life sealed away like a wound that might fester if exposed to air. My wife passed away 3 years ago. Something flickered across Catherine's face. Surprise, sympathy, recognition of shared grief. I'm sorry, that must have been difficult. We manage. He repeated the phrase like a mantra, as if saying it enough times might make it true. Your daughter must be proud of you, working this hard to provide for her. The irony cut deep. Sophie wasn't proud. Sophie was lonely, angry at a father who'd rather live at the office than face the empty spaces in their apartment where her mother used to be. I hope so. Catherine's expression shifted, something almost human, breaking through the professional facade. Children need their parents present, not just providing. I assume you know that. I do. Good. She returned to her screen, the moment of vulnerability sealed away like it had never existed. The final presentation is in 10 days. Make sure it's perfect. Perfect. The word followed him home that night, echoed in Sophie's silence. When he tried to read her a bedtime story, haunted his dreams when he finally collapsed into sleep at midnight. Perfect was the enemy of good enough, and good enough was all he had left to give. The third week arrived with the weight of inevitability. Thursday morning, Dan checked his calendar and felt reality collapse around him. Sophie's ballet recital, Friday 4 o'clock. Henderson presentation, Friday 2 o'clock. The two most important events in his life, separated by 2 hours and an impossible choice. Sophie appeared in the kitchen that morning, already dressed in her pink leotard, her face carrying hope that broke his heart. Today's the last practice, Daddy. Tomorrow's the real show. You'll be in the front row, right? He couldn't look at her, couldn't watch hope die in those eyes that were so much like Sarah's. Sweetheart, tomorrow is my big presentation. The one I've been working on for 3 weeks. But you promised. I know I did, but this is important. I'm not important. Her voice climbed, 6 years old and already understanding betrayal. Emma's mom will be there. Why can't I have a mom and a dick? The words hit like physical blows. Dan knelt down, reaching for her, but she stepped back. Don't say that. I'm trying to give us a better life. I don't want a better life. I want you. Tears streamed down her face, and she ran to her room, the door slamming with finality. Dan stood in the kitchen, Maggie's disappointed gaze heavy on his shoulders. The old woman moved past him to knock on Sophie's door, her voice gentle as she coaxed the child out for breakfast. She didn't say anything to Dan, didn't need to. The silence spoke clearly enough. At 11 that night, long after Sophie had cried herself to sleep, Maggie appeared at Dan's bedroom door. "We need to talk, Danny boy." He looked up from his laptop, Henderson projections swimming before exhausted eyes. "Sarah made me promise something before she passed." Maggie's voice carried the weight of deathbed vows. She was worried. Worried you'd bury yourself in work to avoid the grief. That you'd forget how to live while you were so busy providing. "I'm doing what I have to do. Are you doing what's easier?" She sat on the edge of his bed, her weathered hand covering his. "That child in there has already lost her mother. Don't make her lose her father too, even if you're still breathing. If I don't keep this job, we lose the apartment, Sophie's school, everything. And if you keep the job but lose Sophie's trust, what then?" Maggie stood, moving to the door. "Your wife told me to remind you Sophie needs a father, not a paycheck. Remember that tomorrow when you make your choice." The door closed softly, leaving Dan alone with his laptop and the crushing weight of Sarah's wisdom delivered from beyond the grave. He looked at the photograph on his nightstand, Sarah holding newborn Sophie, love and joy radiating from every pixel. Back when the future held promise instead of impossible choices. He closed the laptop and wept for the first time since the funeral, 3 years of suppressed grief finally breaking through the carefully maintained walls. Friday morning arrived with the inexorable cruelty of fate. Sophie came to breakfast in her ballet outfit, her face carefully neutral, hope tamped down to avoid further disappointment. Dan made pancakes her favorite and tried to pretend his heart wasn't shattering. "Princess about today." "It's okay, Daddy. I know you're busy." Her voice carried the resignation of someone twice her age. "Maggie will be there." "Maggie's not your father. Neither are you lately." She pushed her pancakes around the plate, not eating. "You're just the person who used to be my daddy." The words landed like a killing blow. Dan reached across the table, taking her small hand in his. "Sophie, look at me. I'm still your daddy. I'll always be your daddy." "Then be there today, please." Her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "I don't care about the stupid presentation. I just want my dad." He opened his mouth to promise he'd be there to swear on Sarah's memory that he wouldn't let her down. But the lie stuck in his throat because they both knew the truth. The Henderson presentation represented 2,000 jobs, including his own. One little girl's broken heart weighed against an entire company's future. "I love you so much, Princess. But not enough." She pulled her hand away, her voice going flat. "It's okay. I'm used to it." Maggie appeared to collect Sophie for school, her expression carefully neutral. Sophie didn't hug him goodbye, just walked out the door without looking back. Her small shoulders carrying rejection like a weight too heavy for her frame. Dan stood in his empty apartment, Sarah's photograph watching from the mantel, and hated himself with an intensity that stole his breath. The Meridian offices hummed with Friday energy people, already mentally checked out for the weekend. Dan arrived at 8:43, his usual tardiness, now just part of the routine. He had 5 hours to finalize the Henderson presentation before the board arrived at 2. Catherine summoned him at 9 sharp, her face set in its customary professional mask. "I found errors in the financial projections. The numbers don't match the market research." Dan's stomach dropped. "I'll fix them immediately." "You have until 1 o'clock. The board arrives at 1:30, and I need time to review before we present." She looked at him directly, something almost like concern flickering behind the steel. "You look terrible, Mr. Carter. When's the last time you slept?" "I'll sleep after the presentation." "See that you do. I need you sharp this afternoon, not half dead from exhaustion." The morning dissolved into a frantic scramble of spreadsheet corrections and recalculations. Dan's phone buzzed twice, Maggie checking in Sophie's school, confirming pickup arrangements for the recital. He silenced both calls and dove deeper into numbers that needed to be perfect, because anything less meant failure. 12:45. He hit send on the corrected presentation, his hands trembling from too much coffee and too little sleep. Catherine would have 15 minutes to review before the board arrived. 15 minutes to find any remaining errors and eviscerate him for incompetence. His phone buzzed again. This time he looked. A text from Sophie. "I hope your presentation goes good, Daddy. I love you even though you're not coming." The simple forgiveness in those words broke something inside him that 3 weeks of stress had merely cracked. His daughter was better than he deserved. Kinder. more resilient. All the things Sarah had been compressed into a 6-year-old package that he was slowly destroying through neglect. 1 o'clock came without response from Catherine. Dan paced outside the conference room watching board members file in, powerful men in expensive suits who held Meridian's future in their portfolios and opinions. Chairman Douglas Pierce led the group, his silver hair and calculating eyes marking him as someone who'd built empires and destroyed them with equal efficiency. 1:15. Still no Catherine. Dan's chest tightened as panic crept in. The presentation was loaded, the room was ready, the board was waiting, and the CEO who demanded perfection had vanished. Jessica Murphy, Catherine's assistant, appeared at his elbow. "She's freshening up," said she needed a moment before the meeting. "Did she get my email with the corrections?" "I'm sure she did. Ms. Williams doesn't miss anything." 1:25, 5 minutes before scheduled start time. Dan stood at the head of the conference table, laptop connected to the projector, his career hanging on slides and statistics in the hope that 3 weeks of hell had produced something worthy of salvation. Chairman Pierce checked his Rolex with pointed precision. "Mr. Carter, where is Ms. Williams?" "She'll be here momentarily, sir. She's just—" "I don't pay for moments, young man. I pay for results." The door to the conference room remained stubbornly closed, Catherine's absence growing more conspicuous with each passing second. Dan's mind raced through possibilities. She was sick, she'd found more errors, she'd decided to fire him before the presentation and spare everyone the embarrassment of watching him fail. 1:28. The board members shifted in their seats, impatience radiating from expensive suits and tapping fingers. Dan made a decision born of desperation. "Gentlemen, if you'll excuse me for just one moment, I need to confirm something with Ms. Williams." He left before anyone could object, moving through Meridian's corridors with purpose that masked pure panic. Catherine's main office sat empty, her computer dark, her chair pushed in. The executive floor. She had to be in her private office on the executive floor. Dan took the elevator to 15, his reflection in the polished steel showing a man on the edge of complete breakdown. The executive corridor stretched empty and silent, carpet thick enough to muffle footsteps, walls hung with corporate art that cost more than his annual salary. Catherine's private office occupied the corner, massive windows overlooking the Chicago River and Lake Michigan beyond. The door stood slightly ajar, unusual for someone who guarded privacy like a national secret. Dan knocked softly. "Ms. Williams, the board is waiting." No response. His chest tightened with genuine worry now. What if something was wrong? What if the pain he'd seen her in last week had been something serious? He knocked again, harder. "Miss Williams, it's Carter." "Are you all right?" Silence. Then a sound, something falling, hitting the floor with a muffled thud. His medical training from basic first aid kicked in. If she'd collapsed, if she was hurt, waiting could be dangerous. Dan pushed the door open, words forming on his lips. "Ms. Williams, I apologize for the intrusion, but I'm concerned." Time stopped. His brain registered details in sharp, horrible clarity. Catherine Williams, standing beside her filing cabinet. Navy blazer draped over a chair. White blouse unbuttoned and hanging open. She'd been changing shirts, coffee stain, visible on the discarded one when he'd interrupted. She stood frozen, one arm clutched across her chest, the other reaching desperately for the blazer. But not before Dan saw what she'd spent 5 years hiding, the surgical scar running across her right side, the reconstructed breast with its different texture and tone, the asymmetry that spoke of double mastectomy and imperfect medical solutions. Their eyes met, his horrified, apologetic, unable to look away from something he should never have seen. Hers a mixture of rage and humiliation and pure terror, the Ice Queen's armor shattered in an instant. Catherine's voice came out, broken, shaking with an emotion he'd never heard from her before. "Get out!" Dan stood paralyzed, his mouth opening and closing like a fish drowning in air. "I'm so sorry," I knocked. "I thought you might be—" "I said get out, Mr. Carter!" The words cracked through the room like a whip. Her hands trembled as she clutched the blazer to her chest, and in her eyes Dan saw something that made his heart break, not just anger but fear. The kind of raw, visceral fear that came from having your deepest vulnerability exposed to someone who held power over your professional life. He stumbled backward, hands raised in apology or surrender, words failing completely. The door slammed in his face with enough force to rattle the frame, leaving him standing in the executive hallway with his heart hammering, and the terrible knowledge that he'd just destroyed everything. Not just his job, not just the Henderson presentation. He'd violated the one person at Meridian who'd given him a chance, invaded her privacy, seen the secret she'd fought so hard to protect, the cancer she'd survived alone while building an empire, the scars she wore beneath perfectly tailored suits hidden from a business world that would see them as weakness. Dan returned to the conference room on autopilot, his face carefully blank despite the chaos in his head. Chairman Pierce looked up with irritation that barely masked contempt. "Well, Ms. Williams will be here shortly. She asked that we begin the presentation without her." The lie came easily born of desperation and the knowledge that Catherine would rather endure his betrayal in private than let the board see her anything less than perfectly composed. Dan pulled up the first slide, his hands steady through sheer force of will, and began to speak. Words came from some distant part of his brain, while the rest of him replayed those terrible 2 seconds on infinite loop, Catherine's face, the scar, the fear in her eyes. He was halfway through the competitive analysis when the conference room door opened. Catherine Williams walked in like she owned the World Navy suit, impeccable, dark hair pulled back in its usual severe twist face, carrying the professional mask he'd just seen shatter. Only the slightest tremor in her right hand betrayed anything amiss. "Gentlemen, my apologies for the delay." Her voice could have frozen Lake Michigan. She didn't look at Dan. "Please continue, Mr. Carter." He continued somehow. Slides progressed, statistics illuminated. The Henderson strategy unfolded with the precision of 3 weeks of desperate work. Catherine sat at the head of the table, her posture perfect, her expression unreadable, contributing insights when necessary, and otherwise remaining silent as a tomb. The board asked questions. Dan answered. Catherine elaborated. They functioned as a professional team, presenting a united front, while the space between them crackled with unspoken horror. 45 minutes later, Chairman Pierce stood extending his hand to Catherine with the satisfied smile of a man who'd gotten what he wanted. "Excellent work, Ms. Williams. This addresses our concerns about the merger completely. If you can secure Henderson, you'll have the board's full support for maintaining independence." "Thank you, Douglas. Mr. Carter and his team have worked exceptionally hard on this proposal." The praise felt like acid. Dan shook hands mechanically as board members filed out, accepting congratulations he didn't deserve for a presentation he couldn't remember giving. Marcus Webb appeared in the doorway, his smile carefully neutral, but his eyes gleaming with malicious curiosity. "Good job, Carter. Though you look like you've seen a ghost." If only ghosts didn't haunt you with living eyes full of betrayal and fear. The room emptied until only Catherine and Dan remained, the silence between them heavy enough to crush bones. She stood at the window, her back to him, shoulders rigid with tension that had nothing to do with the presentation. "Ms. Williams, I need to—" "My office, 15 minutes." The words came out clipped final. "Close the door on your way out." Dan left each step toward his cubicle, feeling like a walk to the gallows. Jessica caught his eye as he passed her, expression sympathetic in a way that suggested she knew something terrible had happened, but was too polite to ask. Amy intercepted him at his desk. "You okay? You look terrible." "Just tired." "Well, you nailed it. Henderson's as good as ours." She squeezed his shoulder. "Go home. Get some sleep. You earned it." Home. Sophie's recital had started 20 minutes ago. His daughter was performing the role she'd practiced for months, and he was here waiting to be fired for accidentally seeing his boss's mastectomy scars. The universe's sense of irony remained impeccable. His phone showed 3 missed calls from Maggie and 1 text from Sophie. "Dancing now, wish you were here." Dan closed his eyes and felt the last pieces of himself crumble. He'd sacrificed his daughter for a presentation, violated his boss's privacy through sheer stupidity. And for what? So he could keep a job he'd probably lose anyway. In the next 15 minutes, Sarah's voice echoed in his memory. "Take care of our girl." He'd failed. Failed Sophie, failed Sarah's trust, failed every promise he'd made at that graveside 3 years ago. The walk to Catherine's office took forever and no time at all. Dan knocked at precisely 3 o'clock, his resignation letter already composed in his head. She'd fire him, he'd go home to Sophie, maybe they'd move back to Ohio where his parents could help raise her properly. Start over. Try to remember how to be a father instead of a walking corpse who occasionally went through parental motions. Come in. Catherine's voice carried no inflection, no hint of the emotion he'd seen in her eyes 30 minutes earlier. She stood behind her desk, the massive piece of furniture serving as both shield and symbol of authority. The view behind her stretched across Chicago's afternoon skyline, but Dan couldn't appreciate beauty when his world was ending. Mr. Carter, she gestured to the chair across from her. Sit. He sat hands folded in his lap, waiting for the axe to fall. About what happened earlier. Catherine's voice remained carefully controlled, each word measured and precise. I want to be clear about expectations moving forward. Here it comes. Dan braced himself for termination, for the security escort from the building, for the humiliation of explaining to Sophie why Daddy couldn't afford ballet lessons anymore. What you saw today. Catherine paused, and for just a moment, her professional mask slipped, revealing the raw vulnerability underneath. I expect your complete discretion. Not fired, not yet. Dan's brain struggled to process this unexpected direction. Of course, Ms. Williams. You have my word. I would never. I know you wouldn't. She sat down slowly, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. If I thought otherwise, we wouldn't be having this conversation. The silence stretched between them, heavy with things unsaid. Finally, Dan found his voice. I am deeply sorry. I knocked twice, and when I heard something fall, I was worried you might be hurt. There's no excuse for barging in like that, but I want you to know I wasn't trying to violate your privacy. Catherine studied him with those gray eyes that usually cut like scalpels, but now just looked tired. You thought I'd collapsed. Yes, because of the medication you found last week. Dan's face heated. I'm sorry about that, too. Your purse fell, and the bottle, tamoxifen. She said the word flatly like a diagnosis instead of a treatment. Hormone therapy prevents breast cancer recurrence. The confession hung in the air between them, and Dan realized with sudden clarity what this cost her, admitting vulnerability to a subordinate, acknowledging the disease that could have killed her might still kill her. I didn't know. The words felt inadequate. I mean, I figured out you'd had cancer, but I didn't know details. And I don't need to know. It's none of my business. No, it's not. Catherine's voice softened slightly. But since you've seen more than anyone at this company except Robert Hayes, I'd rather you hear the truth from me than office gossip. She stood moving to the window, her back to him again. Easier to confess to the Chicago skyline than to another person's face. Double mastectomy, 3.5 years ago, stage 2 breast cancer. The words came out clinical, detached, like she was describing someone else's medical history. Reconstruction was complicated. The results aren't cosmetically ideal. Ms. Williams, you don't have to explain. Yes, I do. She turned to face him, and the raw honesty in her expression nearly knocked him backward. Because I need you to understand why I reacted the way I did. This isn't about vanity. It's about survival. Dan waited, sensing she needed to say this more than he needed to hear it. I built this company while recovering from cancer. Came to work the day after chemo with ice packs under my blouse and a smile on my face because showing weakness would have given the board exactly the excuse they needed to replace me. Her voice hardened with remembered anger. A sick CEO is a liability. A female CEO with cancer is a ticking time bomb. I couldn't let them see me as anything less than invincible. So you went through it alone. I had Robert. He figured it out, forced me to tell. Been like a father ever since. Something soft crossed her features at the mention of the CFO. But otherwise, yes. Alone. Dan's chest tightened with an emotion he couldn't quite name. This woman, this brilliant, terrifying, impossibly driven woman, had fought cancer in secret while leading a company through its most challenging fiscal period. No wonder she had no personal life. She'd been too busy surviving. I'm sorry. The inadequacy of the words mocked him. That must have been incredibly lonely. Catherine's laugh carried no humor. Lonely. Yes, that's one word for it. She returned to her desk, sitting with the careful precision of someone who'd learned to move through pain without showing it. My parents died when I was 25. Car accident in Boston. No siblings, no extended family. When I was diagnosed, I had colleagues, not friends, certainly not family. The parallel struck Dan with unexpected force, both of them alone, Both of them hiding grief behind professional competence. Both of them so focused on survival, they'd forgotten how to actually live. My wife died 3 years ago. The confession spilled out before he could stop it. Ovarian cancer, stage 4 by the time they found it. Catherine's eyes widened, slightly genuine surprise breaking through her composure. I didn't know you were widowed. Your HR file doesn't mention it. I don't talk about it at work. Don't want the pity, the careful handling, the assumption that I'm broken. Yes. Her voice held recognition of shared experience. People treat you differently once they know, like you're made of glass that might shatter. Exactly. Dan leaned forward, the barrier between boss and employee dissolving in the face of mutual understanding. I love my wife more than anything, but I couldn't save her. Couldn't fix it, couldn't fight it for her, couldn't do anything except watch her slip away. So now I work myself half to death trying to provide for our daughter, because at least that's something I can control. How old is she, your daughter? 6, Sophie. His throat tightened, saying her name. She's smart, funny, resilient. Everything her mother was. And she's struggling with your work hours. Not a question. Catherine's insight cut straight to the heart of his failure. Children need their parents present, not just providing. I know. The admission tasted like ash. Her ballet recital was today, 4 o'clock. I promised I'd be there, and I chose this presentation instead. He checked his watch, 4:37, over and done. And she'll forgive me eventually, she always does. But the trust I'm destroying, I don't know how to get that back. Catherine was quiet for a long moment, her expression shifting through emotions Dan couldn't read. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight that made him listen with his entire being. When I was diagnosed, the doctors gave me an 83% 5-year survival rate. Good odds statistically. But all I could think about was the 17%. The possibility that I'd fought so hard to build something that mattered, and I wouldn't be alive to see if it survived. She looked directly at him, and the vulnerability in her eyes made his breath catch. I spent 3 years fighting to live, Mr. Carter. And you know what I realized? I'd forgotten why I was fighting. I have no family, no friends outside work, no life beyond these walls. I survived cancer, but I'm not actually living. The confession hung between them, raw and honest and terrifying in its implications. Don't make my mistake. Catherine stood moving around her desk with sudden purpose. Your daughter's recital. What time did you say it started? 4, but it's almost 5 now. How long do these things usually run? Hour and a half, maybe 2 hours. Catherine pulled out her phone fingers, moving with practiced efficiency. Lincoln Park Elementary. That's your daughter's school, correct? How did you? I pay attention, Mr. Carter. She finished typing, looked up at him. The recital runs until 5:30. If you leave now, you'll catch the second half. Dan stared at her, unable to process what she was suggesting. But the Henderson follow-up, the board debrief, can wait until Monday. Catherine's voice held finality. The presentation was flawless. Henderson is all but signed. There is nothing, and I mean nothing, that can't wait until Monday morning. Are you sure? She walked to the door, opened it, the gesture making her intent clear. That's an order, Mr. Carter. Go see your daughter dance. Dan stood on shaking legs, gratitude and confusion, and something that felt dangerously close to hope swirling in his chest. At the threshold, he paused. Ms. Williams, Catherine. The correction came softly. After today, I think we've earned first names. Catherine. He tested the name, found it fit. Thank you for understanding, for everything. Something shifted in her expression, a crack in the armor she'd worn for so long, it had become her skin. Go, Daniel. Don't miss the moments that matter. I've made that mistake enough for both of us. He ran, sprinted through Meridian's corridors, took the stairs because the elevator was too slow, burst onto Michigan Avenue, and hailed a cab with desperate urgency. The driver caught his panic, wove through Friday traffic with aggressive skill. Dan arrived at Lincoln Park Elementary at 5:07, tie askew shirt, untucked, completely disheveled, and utterly uncaring. The auditorium doors stood open, music spilling into the hallway. Tchaikovsky, delicate and heartbreaking. He slipped into the back row just as the corps de ballet took the stage. 20 little girls in pink tutus, and their third from the left, Sophie. She'd been demoted from lead swan because she'd missed rehearsals. His fault. Another sacrifice laid at the altar of his ambition. But she was dancing. Really dancing, not just going through motions. Her small face concentrated with fierce determination, her movements graceful despite being relegated to background. She was trying so hard, giving everything she had, and he'd almost missed it entirely. Sophie's eyes scanned the audience during a turn, the practice movement she'd done 100 times in practice. They swept past the empty seat where he should have been, resignation already settling across her features. Then she saw him, standing in the back, disheveled and out of breath, and actually there. Her entire face transformed, shock, giving way to joy so pure it made his heart stop. She nearly stumbled on the next pirouette, recovered, kept dancing, but with an energy that hadn't been there before. Dan watched his daughter dance, tears streaming down his face that he didn't bother to hide. This was what mattered. Not Henderson Manufacturing or board presentations or career advancement. This 6-year-old girl who'd already lost her mother and was slowly losing her father to grief, disguised as ambition, she was what mattered. The performance ended to thunderous applause. Sophie took her bow with the core, her eyes never leaving Dan's face, as if she feared he'd disappear if she looked away. The moment the curtain fell, she was running straight down the center aisle, leaping into his arms with the full force of her small body. "You came, Daddy. You really came." He held her tight enough to bruise, breathing in the scent of her hairspray and sweat and the indefinable smell that was uniquely Sophie. "I wouldn't miss it for anything, Princess." She pulled back, searching at his face with those two old eyes. "But your presentation went fine. But you're more important than any presentation." He meant it. For the first time in 3 years, he meant it with every fiber of his being. "I'm sorry I've been working so much. I'm sorry I've made you feel like you don't matter. You matter more than anything in the world." Sophie hugged him again, and he felt something shift inside his chest, at a wall beginning to crumble. Grief starting to transform into something that might eventually resemble healing. Maggie appeared beside them, her lined face creasing into a smile. "Well done, Danny boy. Sarah would be proud." That night, after Sophie had finally fallen asleep, excited energy giving way to exhaustion, Dan sat in his kitchen and stared at the photograph of Sarah on the mantel. For 3 years, he'd been running from her death, using work to avoid the gaping hole she'd left in their lives. But running hadn't filled the hole. It had just created new ones. A knock at the door surprised him. Maggie stood in the hallway holding a small package. "This was delivered an hour ago. For you." Dan opened it to find a framed photograph, professional quality, clearly taken during the recital. Sophie, mid-leap, joy radiating from every line of her body, and in the background, just visible. Dan clapping with tears on his face. A note accompanied it, written in elegant script on cream-colored cardstock: "Mr. Carter. Some moments define us more than presentations ever could. Thank you for sharing your story with me today. It reminded me that vulnerability isn't weakness, it's the courage to be human. Your discretion regarding this afternoon is deeply appreciated. CWPS Sophie is fortunate to have you." Dan read the note 3 times, something warm and unfamiliar blooming in his chest. Catherine Williams, the Ice Queen, who'd survived cancer alone, who'd built an empire on the ashes of her own mortality, who hid scars beneath perfect suits and buried loneliness under professional excellence, had given him a gift that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with being human. He placed the photograph on the mantel beside Sarah's wedding picture. They looked right together, past and present, grief and healing, everything he'd lost and everything he still had to fight for. Monday would bring new challenges. The Henderson account needed finalizing. Catherine would rebuild her walls, and he'd return to being Mr. Carter instead of Daniel. But something had shifted between them in that office, in that moment of mutual vulnerability. Two people who'd survived loss and learned to hide behind work had seen each other's scars, literal and metaphorical, and chosen compassion over judgment. Dan pulled out his laptop and did something he hadn't done since Sarah's funeral, he wrote. Not marketing copy or presentations, but actual words from his actual heart. About grief and fatherhood, and the woman who'd reminded him that surviving and living were different things. About the daughter who deserved better than a ghost for a father. About second chances and the courage it took to be vulnerable in a world that rewarded armor over authenticity. He didn't know if he'd ever show the words to anyone, but writing them felt like exhaling after holding his breath for 3 years. Felt like maybe possibly he could learn to live again instead of just existing in the spaces between obligations. Outside Chicago settled into Friday night, the city lights reflecting off Lake Michigan in patterns of gold and shadow. Somewhere in a Gold Coast penthouse, Catherine Williams probably sat alone with her own ghosts, her own walls, her own carefully hidden scars. Two broken people, both terrified of vulnerability, both learning that strength sometimes looked like admitting you couldn't do it alone. Dan closed his laptop and checked on Sophie one last time. She slept peacefully, her small face relaxed in dreams, the stress of the past 3 weeks already fading. He kissed her forehead and whispered the promise he should have made 3 years ago. I'm here, princess. Really here, not going anywhere. Tomorrow he'd figure out how to be both a father and a provider, how to keep his job without sacrificing his daughter, how to honor Sarah's memory by actually living the life she'd fought so hard to protect. But tonight he just sat in the darkness and let himself feel grief and hope and gratitude and fear all tangled together in the messy reality of being human. The photograph on the mantel caught the streetlight from outside. Sophie froze in mid-leap, pure joy captured in pixels and frame. Some moments define us more than presentations ever could. Catherine had been right about that. The only question was whether they'd both have the courage to remember it come Monday morning, when professional armor beckoned and vulnerability felt too dangerous to risk. Monday morning arrived with the weight of unspoken things. Dan walked into Meridian expecting everything to snap back to the professional distance that had defined his relationship with Catherine Williams for 6 months. Instead, she passed his cubicle at 8:30 and nodded a small gesture that somehow acknowledged Friday's shared vulnerability without demanding discussion. Good morning, Mr. Carter. Ms. Williams. They'd returned to formality, but something underneath had shifted. Her voice carried warmth it hadn't held before, and when their eyes met, neither looked away quite as quickly. The Ice Queen's armor had returned, but now Dan knew what it protected. Knew the scars beneath the suit, the loneliness behind the perfect composure. The morning team meeting brought the first real evidence that Friday had changed more than just their private understanding. Catherine stood at the head of the conference table, her usual commanding presence softened by an announcement that made the entire department sit straighter. Effective immediately, Meridian is implementing flexible work hours. Results matter. FaceTime doesn't. Her gray eyes swept the room, landing briefly on Dan. Family commitments will be respected. If you need to leave early for a child's event, a parent's doctor appointment, whatever, just make sure your work gets done. Marcus Webb's hand shot up. What about performance reviews? How do we measure productivity if people aren't in the office? By the quality of their output, Mr. Webb. Revolutionary concept, I know. Catherine's voice carried just enough edge to shut down further questions. Anyone who can't meet deadlines with flexible hours will be addressed individually. But I'm willing to bet most of you will be more productive when you're not sacrificing everything else for the appearance of dedication. After the meeting dispersed, Amy grabbed Dan's elbow. Did the Ice Queen just implement work-life balance? Did hell freeze over and nobody told me? People change. Not her. She's been a workaholic tyrant for 5 years. Amy studied him with unsettling perception. What happened Friday after the presentation? Nothing, just a conversation about priorities. But Amy's knowing smile suggested she didn't believe him, and Dan wondered how long it would take before office gossip transformed a moment of genuine human connection into something salacious and false. The answer came Wednesday morning. Dan arrived to find the office buzzing with speculation, eyes tracking him with curiosity that made his skin crawl. Jessica pulled him aside near the break room, her voice low. People are talking about you and Ms. Williams. Talking about what the Henderson presentation, about why she suddenly cares about work-life balance, about you leaving early Friday and her being okay with it. Jessica's expression carried warning. Marcus is telling people she's playing favorites. That's ridiculous. Is it? She's never cut anyone slack before, never implemented flexible policies. Then you work on one big project and suddenly she's Mother Teresa. Jessica shrugged. I'm not saying I believe it, I'm saying watch your back. Dan spent the rest of Wednesday hyper-aware of whispers that stopped when he approached glances that carried speculation. By Thursday, Marcus had escalated from whispers to open confrontation, cornering Dan by the elevators at lunch. You sleeping with the boss, Carter? The accusation hit like a physical blow. Dan's hands clenched at his sides, rage and disbelief warring for dominance. What did you just say? Simple question. You've been here less than a year, junior position. Suddenly you're getting the biggest account special treatment and she's restructuring company policy to accommodate your daddy duties. Marcus leaned in his breath, coffee stale and bitter. So either you're incredibly talented, which we both know you're not, or you're incredibly good at something that has nothing to do with marketing. You're out of line. Am I? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like the Ice Queen finally found something that melts her. Marcus straightened his smile, carrying venom. Just remember, when she gets tired of you, the rest of us will still be here. And we have long memories. Dan wanted to throw a punch. Wanted to explain that Catherine Williams had survived cancer alone, that her newfound humanity had nothing to do with sex and everything to do with recognizing her own mortality. But defending her meant revealing her secret, and he'd promised discretion. So he swallowed his rage and walked away, Marcus's laughter following him down the corridor. That evening, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Catherine. Could we meet for coffee tomorrow morning, 6:45, the Starbucks on Wacker? Need to discuss something. Dan stared at the message, his thumb hovering over the reply. Meeting his boss for coffee before work hours would only fuel the gossip fire Marcus had started. But the careful phrasing, need to discuss something, suggested this wasn't optional. I'll be there. Friday morning found him at a corner table, two coffees already cooling in front of him. When Catherine arrived at 6:47, she had abandoned her usual suits for dark jeans and a cream cashmere sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders in soft waves. The transformation was startling. She looked younger, more approachable, almost vulnerable. You bought my coffee. She sat across from him, something like gratitude in her eyes. How did you know my order? Black, 2 sugars. I pay attention too. A smile ghosted across her features, genuine and brief. I asked you here because I need to address something before it becomes a problem. She wrapped both hands around the cup, not drinking. People are talking about us. I know. Marcus cornered me yesterday, asked if I was sleeping with you. Catherine's jaw tightened. What did you tell him? Nothing. Walked away before I said something I'd regret. Dan leaned forward, keeping his voice low, despite the early morning emptiness of the coffee shop. But he's not going to stop. The flexible hours policy, me getting the Henderson account, you letting me leave for Sophie's recital, he's building a narrative that has nothing to do with reality. I'm aware. Catherine finally took a sip of coffee, her composure cracking, just enough to show frustration underneath. Jennifer Brooks from HR called me yesterday. Said she's received concerns about potential favoritism, about inappropriate relationships between management and subordinates. What did you tell her? The truth, that our relationship is professional, that you earned the Henderson account through merit, that the flexible hours benefit everyone, not just you. She set down her cup with careful precision. But she's right to be concerned. Perception matters in corporate environments. Even the appearance of impropriety can be damaging. Dan's chest tightened with the implication. So what are you saying? We can't even talk to each other now. I'm saying we need to be careful, strategic. Catherine's eyes met his, and in them he saw the same frustration he felt. Two people who'd found unexpected understanding, now forced to hide it because other people's minds lived in gutters. I'm implementing a mentorship program. Robert Hayes will be your official mentor. All career advancement decisions will go through him, not me. It creates a buffer, removes any appearance of direct favoritism. You're demoting me. I'm protecting us both. Her voice softened. Daniel, I value what happened Friday. The honesty, the connection. But I won't let office gossip destroy your career or mine. We play this smart or we lose everything. The logic was sound even as it chafed against his instinct to fight back. Okay, professional distance during work hours. I can do that. Good. Oh, Catherine stood preparing to leave, then hesitated. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Sorry that kindness gets twisted into something ugly. Sorry that the world doesn't allow for human connection without assuming the worst. It's not your fault. Isn't it? I'm the one who built the Ice Queen reputation. Can't blame people for being shocked when she shows signs of thawing. She picked up her coffee, offered him a small smile. See you at the office, Mr. Carter. Miss Williams. He watched her leave the careful distance already reasserting itself and felt something precious slipping away before it had a chance to fully form. The mentorship program launched the following Tuesday with an announcement that positioned it as a company-wide initiative rather than damage control. Robert Hayes pulled Dan into his office that afternoon, the older man's weathered face carrying both amusement and concern. Catherine tells me I'm your new mentor. Want to explain why she's really doing this. Office gossip, people think there's something inappropriate between us. Robert's laugh rumbled deep in his chest. Of course they do. She shows a sliver of humanity, and the vultures assume sex, as if Catherine Williams would risk everything she's built for a dalliance with a subordinate. His expression turned serious. But you should know she doesn't let people in easily. The fact that she's restructuring company protocol to protect you says more than any rumor ever could. We're just friends. Are you? Robert's knowing look made Dan squirm. Son, I've known Catherine for 10 years. Watched her build this company while fighting cancer in secret. She doesn't do friends. She does professional relationships and careful distance. If she's making exceptions for you, there's a reason. She saw something familiar in me. Grief, loss. We understand each other. Maybe. Robert leaned back in his chair. Or maybe she finally found someone who sees past the armor to the woman underneath. Either way, be careful. Catherine's been hurt before, though she'd never admit it. Don't add to that damage. The warning stayed with Dan through 2 weeks of enforced distance. He and Catherine maintained scrupulous professionalism. Emails were formal, interactions were brief, and they went out of their way to avoid being alone together. The gossip gradually died down, replaced by new office drama and the relentless march of quarterly targets. But Dan found himself watching her when he thought no one noticed. Saw the loneliness that crept into her posture during lunch hours when she ate alone at her desk. Noticed the way her hand went to her right shoulder during long meetings, massaging pain she'd never acknowledged. Wondered if she was watching him too, if she felt the same pull toward connection that they were both desperately trying to ignore. 3 weeks into their careful détente, fate intervened in the form of Sophie's school calling at 2:30 on a Wednesday afternoon. Dan's heart stopped at the principal's somber tone. Mr. Carter, there has been an accident. Sophie fell from the playground equipment. We've called an ambulance. They're taking her to Northwestern Memorial. Possible concussion. He didn't remember grabbing his jacket or running to the elevator. Didn't remember the cab ride through Chicago traffic that moved too slowly while his daughter lay injured. The world narrowed to a single thought, pounding in rhythm with his heartbeat. Please let her be okay. Please let her be okay. Please. The ER at Northwestern was controlled chaos. Dan burst through the sliding doors, Sophie's name already on his lips, when the nurse at reception directed him to Base 7. She lay on a gurney looking impossibly small, a butterfly bandage on her forehead and her eyes slightly unfocused. Maggie sat beside her, the old woman's face drawn with worry. Daddy, Sophie's voice sounded weak but present. I fell off the monkey bars. The nurse says I have a concussion, baby girl. Dan gathered her into his arms, breathing in her little kid smell and feeling his heart restart. You scared me. I'm sorry. No apologies. Accidents happen. He looked at Maggie over Sophie's head. Thank you for being here. Where else would I be? Maggie's eyes held reproach that stung. Though I called your office an hour ago, Jessica said you were in a meeting and couldn't be disturbed. Because he'd told Jessica to hold all calls during a presentation review with a client. Because he'd been too focused on work to check his messages. Because even after Friday's revelation, he still defaulted to making career the priority. The curtain pulled back and Dan's world tilted sideways. Catherine Williams stood there in her navy suit holding flowers and a stuffed teddy bear, her professional mask cracking at the sight of Sophie's bandaged head. I heard what happened. Is she all right? Dan's mind struggled to process her presence. What are you doing here? Jessica told me Sophie was hurt. I came as soon as I could. Catherine approached the bed slowly, her attention focused entirely on the small figure. Hello, Sophie. I'm Kate. Your dad works with me. Sophie's eyes widened. Your daddy's boss, the one who makes him work all the time. Catherine's laugh carried genuine warmth. I suppose I am, though your dad works hard because he loves you very much, not because I make him. Do you have kids? The question landed like a bomb. Catherine's expression flickered longing, regret, grief compressed into a microsecond before her composure returned. No, sweetheart, I don't. Then you can share my daddy. He's a really good daddy when he's not working. Catherine's eyes met Dan's across the bed, and something passed between them that had nothing to do with professional boundaries and everything to do with shared loneliness, recognizing itself in another person. The doctor arrived with discharge instructions, mild concussion, rest for 48 hours, wake her every 2 hours overnight to check for worsening symptoms. Dan nodded mechanically, already calculating how he'd manage round-the-clock monitoring while keeping up with work. Catherine followed them into the parking lot as he bundled Sophie into Maggie's car. The early evening air carried October chill leaves swirling in the breeze off Lake Michigan. You didn't have to come. Dan's voice came out rougher than intended. But thank you. I wanted to. When Jessica said Sophie was hurt, I couldn't focus on anything else. Catherine's admission carried weight vulnerability she rarely showed. Is that inappropriate, caring whether my employee's child is okay? It's human. Yes, well, humanity hasn't always served me well in business. She handed him the teddy bear she'd bought. Give this to Sophie when she's feeling better. Tell her it's from a friend. Dan took the bear, their fingers brushing briefly. The contact sent electricity up his arm that had nothing to do with static and everything to do with the woman standing too close in a hospital parking lot while his daughter recovered from injury. Kate. He used her first name deliberately, saw her eyes widen at the intimacy. Why did you really come here? She was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the distant skyline. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of confession. Because when I got cancer, no one came. I drove myself to appointments, sat through diagnoses alone, came home to empty apartments in silence. She looked at him, then her eyes bright with unshed tears. I didn't want Sophie to feel that alone. Or you. The admission hung between them, raw and honest and terrifying in its implications. Dan stepped closer, drawn by gravity he couldn't fight. We're not alone anymore. Either of us. Catherine's breath caught. Daniel, we can't. Why not? Because of office gossip, because people with small minds can't imagine genuine connection without sex. His frustration boiled over 3 weeks of enforced distance collapsing under the weight of this moment. I care about you, Kate, not as my boss, not as some professional contact. As a person, as someone who understands what it's like to survive loss and forget how to actually live. I don't know how to do this. Her voice broke on the words. How to let someone in. Last time I felt something, cancer hit 2 months later. Like the universe was punishing me for daring to be happy. That's not how it works, isn't it? I lost control of my body, my health, my future. Took me 3 years to build those walls back up, and now you're asking me to tear them down. She wrapped her arms around herself, armor against vulnerability. What if I can't? What if I'm too broken to let anyone close? Dan closed the remaining distance between them, his hands gentle on her shoulders. Then we'll figure it out together. Because I'm broken too, Kate. Widowed single dad who's been hiding behind work to avoid grief. We're both a mess. Maybe that's okay. Her hands came up to rest on his chest, not pushing away, but not pulling closer either. Caught between fear and hope, between armor and authenticity. The gossip will get worse if we do this. Let it, we know the truth. Your career matters less than this, less than Sophie getting to see her dad actually living instead of just existing. Less than you finally having someone who gives a damn whether you're okay. His voice softened. When you got the cancer diagnosis, who did you call? Robert. And when you were scared, when you thought you might die, who held you? Catherine's face crumpled. No one. I went through it alone because I did not know how to ask for help. Then let me help now. Let me be the person who shows up, who cares, who sees you as more than the ice queen or the CEO or the cancer survivor. Dan's thumb brushed away a tear that had escaped her carefully maintained control. Let me see Kate. She kissed him. Quick and desperate and terrifying, her hands fisting in his shirt as 3 years of loneliness and fear compressed into contact. Dan responded instinctively, his arms wrapping around her as she trembled against him. They pulled apart at the sound of a car door slamming nearby, reality crashing back with the force of Chicago wind. Catherine stepped back, her fingers touching her lips like she couldn't quite believe what had just happened. I should go. Kate, I need to think about this, about what it means, what we're risking. She walked backward toward her car, her eyes never leaving his. Take care of Sophie. We'll talk later. She was gone before he could respond, leaving him standing in a hospital parking lot with a stuffed bear and the taste of her kiss still on his lips. Maggie appeared at his elbow. Sophie dozed in the car behind them. That's your boss? Yes. The Ice Queen everyone says has no heart. She has a heart. She just protects it carefully. Maggie studied him with eyes that had seen too much of life to be fooled. You're falling for her. Dan couldn't deny it. Maybe I already have. Then be careful, Danny boy. Women like that, women who've survived what she's survived, they don't give their trust easily. And if you break it, there's no putting it back together. He carried Sophie upstairs, tucked her into bed with the teddy bear Catherine had brought. His daughter hugged it close, her voice sleepy. I like your boss, Daddy. She has sad eyes like you do. But she smiled when she looked at me. She did, didn't she? Are you friends with her? Real friends, not just work friends. Dan smoothed Sophie's curls, Sarah's curls, and felt the parallel lives intersecting in ways he hadn't anticipated. I think we might be princess. Is that okay with you? Uh-huh. Friends are good. Friends make the sad eyes less sad. Sophie yawned, already drifting. You should be friends with lots of people so you're not lonely like Mommy worried about. The casual revelation punched the air from his lungs. Mommy worried I'd be lonely. She told me to take care of you, said you'd be fun after she left, and I should make sure you smiled sometimes. Sophie's eyes were already closed. But you don't smile much. Maybe your friend Kate can help. Dan sat beside his daughter's bed long after she fell asleep, grappling with the weight of a 6-year-old's wisdom. Sarah had known he'd struggle, had prepared their daughter to shoulder burdens no child should carry. And now Sophie was giving him permission to move forward, to find connection with someone who understood loss in ways most people never would. His phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. Is Sophie okay? Mild concussion, sleeping now, thank you for coming. I meant what I said about not wanting you to be alone. Dan's fingers hovered over the keyboard, a dozen responses forming and dissolving. Finally, coffee tomorrow. Same place, same time. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Yes, we need to talk. Saturday morning brought autumn sunlight through Starbucks windows, and Catherine already seated when Dan arrived. She dressed in jeans and a green sweater that brought out flecks of color in her gray eyes, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Without the armor of suits and severe styling, she looked almost fragile. How's Sophie? Bouncing back. Doctor says she'll be fine, just needs rest. Dan settled across from her, 2 coffees between them. She really liked you, said you have sad eyes like mine, but you smiled at her. Catherine's laugh was soft and surprised. She's perceptive. 6-year-olds usually are. He studied her across the table, this woman who'd somehow become essential in the space of a few weeks. We should probably talk about last night. The kiss. Among other things. Catherine wrapped her hands around her cup, a gesture he was beginning to recognize as her tell when nervous. I don't do this, Daniel. I don't let people close, don't date colleagues, don't risk my carefully constructed life for feelings that might disappear. But I can't stop thinking about you, about Sophie, about what it might be like to have people who actually care whether I make it home at night. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I'm terrified of getting hurt, of hurting you, of this blowing up in both our faces. But I'm more terrified of walking away and spending the rest of my life wondering, what if? Dan reached across the table, his hand covering hers. Then we take it slow. Figure this out as we go. No pressure, no expectations. Just 2 broken people trying to heal together. What about the office gossip? Let me handle that. Robert's my mentor now. All my career advancement goes through him. We maintain professional boundaries at work. What we do outside work is nobody's business. He squeezed her hand gently. Unless you are worried about your reputation. My reputation is ice and efficiency, Adding human to that list might be good for morale. Catherine turned her hand over, lacing her fingers with his. Okay, slow. We try this and see what happens. Any ground rules? Honesty, a complete honesty even when it's uncomfortable. I spent 3 years hiding cancer from everyone. I'm done with secrets that matter. She met his eyes. And patience. I'm going to be terrible at this. At opening up, at trusting, at all of it. There will be moments I panic and pull away. And I'll be here when you're ready to come back. Dan's thumb traced circles on her palm. My ground rule, Sophie comes first. Always. If this ever feels like it's hurting her, we stop. Agreed. She's already lost her mother. She doesn't need to lose stability because her father's dating his boss. The word dating hung between them, making it real in ways the kiss hadn't. They were doing this, attempting something that could explode both their lives if they weren't careful. But the alternative, walking away from this unexpected connection, felt like choosing death over the risk of living. They spent the rest of the morning talking, sharing histories that went deeper than Friday's revelations. Catherine described her parents' accident, the sudden loneliness of being 25 and completely alone. The way she'd thrown herself into her MBA, then into climbing Meridian's corporate ladder, using ambition to fill the void where family should have been. When I got the cancer diagnosis, my first thought was, who will even notice if I die? The admission cost her. Dan could see it in the way her shoulders tensed. I'd built this empire of professional success, and there was literally no one who'd miss me for anything other than business reasons. Robert would have missed you. Robert's paid to care. He's CFO, not family. You don't really believe that. Dan leaned back, studying her. He figured out you had cancer when you were trying to hide it. Made you tell him. That's not professional obligation, that's love. Catherine's eyes glistened. Maybe, but it's not the same as having someone who chose you, who stays because they want to, not because their paycheck depends on it. I choose you. The words came easily, truth stripped of pretense. Not because you're my boss, not because of professional advancement, because you're the first person since Sarah died who made me feel like maybe I could be whole again instead of just functional. They left Starbucks with plans for the following weekend, a real date dinner somewhere Sophie wouldn't recognize Catherine as Daddy's boss. The secrecy chafed, but they both understood the necessity. Office relationships required careful navigation, and adding a power dynamic to the mix multiplied the complexity. Monday brought renewed scrutiny. Marcus watched Dan like a hawk, tracking his movements, timing his breaks. When Catherine emerged from her office at 10 for a coffee refill, Marcus materialized at Dan's elbow. Interesting weekend. Stayed home with my daughter. She had a concussion. Right. Heard the Ice Queen visited her at the hospital. Marcus's voice dripped insinuation. Awfully personal for a boss who supposedly doesn't care about anyone. She's implementing company-wide policy changes about compassion. Of course she'd check on an employee's injured child. Is that what we're calling it now? Compassion. Marcus leaned against Dan's cubicle, his smile sharp. Face it, Carter. Everyone knows something's going on. The only question is, how long before it blows up in both your faces? Jennifer Brooks from HR appeared before Dan could respond, her professional smile not reaching her eyes. Mr. Carter, could I see you in my office? The walk down the corridor felt like a death march. Jennifer's office was neutral corporate beige motivational posters about teamwork, contrasting with the intimidation inherent in any HR summons. She gestured to a chair, her expression unreadable. I'll be direct. I've received multiple reports of inappropriate relationship between you and Ms. Williams. Care to comment? Dan forced himself to stay calm. There's nothing inappropriate about our professional relationship. She's my CEO. I'm her employee. We maintain appropriate boundaries. Do you? Because witnesses report seeing you two at Starbucks Saturday morning, holding hands across the table. His blood ran cold. Someone had followed them or coincidentally seen them and reported back. The gossip wasn't just office whispers anymore. It had evidence. What I do on my personal time is my business, not when it involves your direct supervisor and creates conflicts of interest. Jennifer's voice remained professional, but her eyes held warning. I'm not saying anything inappropriate has happened. I'm saying the appearance of impropriety is almost as damaging as actual impropriety. For both of you. She's not my direct supervisor anymore. Robert Hayes is my mentor. All career decisions go through him. A convenient restructuring that happened right when rumors started. You see how this looks. Jennifer leaned forward. I like you, Dan. You're a good employee, good father from what I hear. But Meridian has policies for a reason. Relationships between management and subordinates require disclosure and often reassignment. If you and Ms. Williams are involved romantically, one of you needs to transfer to a different department or leave the company entirely. The ultimatum crystallized the stakes. Their jobs or their relationship, they couldn't have both. There's no relationship to disclose. The lie tasted bitter, but the alternative was worse. We had coffee. We're friends. That's not against company policy. Then I suggest you keep it that way, because the board is watching and they're looking for any excuse to question Ms. Williams's judgment. Don't give them ammunition. Jennifer's expression softened slightly. Think about what you're risking. Both of you. Dan left HR in a daze, his phone already buzzing with a text from Catherine. My office now. She stood at her window when he entered, her posture rigid with tension that had nothing to do with work. Jennifer just called. Someone saw us Saturday. I know. She summoned me too. Catherine turned and the fear in her eyes made his chest ache. They're making it an ultimatum. End the relationship or one of us leaves. We barely started. They can't. They absolutely can. Corporate policy is clear on management-subordinate relationships. We either transfer you to a different department, I resign, or we stop seeing each other. Her voice cracked on the last option. Those are our choices. Dan moved toward her, stopping at her sharp gesture. Right, professional boundaries during work hours. He forced himself to stay by the door. What do you want to do? I don't know. Catherine's admission carried defeat. This company is everything I built. My entire identity for 10 years. But you make me feel like maybe I could have more than just work. Like maybe there's a life worth living beyond these walls. Then fight for it. For us. How by throwing away my career, by making you sacrifice yours? She shook her head. I survived cancer only to realize I have nothing worth surviving for. Now I finally find someone, and I have to choose between you and the only thing I know how to do. The rawness of her confession broke something in Dan. He crossed the room despite the risks, his hands gentle on her shoulders. You're more than this job, Kate. You're brilliant and strong and terrified of being vulnerable, and I don't. She stepped back, armor slamming into place. Don't say something we can't take back. Not here, not now. When then? When Jennifer makes it official, when the board forces you out because you dared to be human. I need time to think. Catherine moved to her desk, putting furniture between them like a shield. We both do. This is happening too fast, risking too much. Dan recognized retreat when he saw it. The walls were going back up, fear winning over hope. Okay, time. But Kate, don't use the time to convince yourself you're better off alone. Because you're not, and I'm not, and we both know it. He left before she could respond, Marcus's knowing smirk, greeting him in the corridor. The gossip mill had won this round, turning genuine connection into corporate scandal. The question was whether they'd have the courage to fight back, or whether fear would drive them into the isolation they'd both endured for far too long. That evening, Maggie found Dan staring at Sarah's photo while Sophie colored at the kitchen table. The old woman's expression carried sympathy that made his throat tight. Trouble at work. You could say that. Turns out having feelings for your boss violates corporate policy. The cancer survivor. Maggie's voice held no judgment, just observation. The one with sad eyes. Her name's Kate. And yes, she survived breast cancer alone because she didn't think she deserved help. Dan scrubbed his face with both hands. Now we finally find each other, and the world's telling us we can't have this, that we have to choose between careers and connection. Sophie looked up from her coloring. Is Kate in trouble because of us? The perceptiveness of 6-year-olds never ceased to amaze. Not because of you, princess, because grown-ups have complicated rules about who can be friends. That's stupid. Yeah, it really is. Maggie settled into the chair across from him, her weathered hands folded on the table. Your Sarah, God rest her, she made me promise something else before she passed. Want to hear it? Dan nodded, unable to speak around the lump in his throat. She said, when Danny finds someone new, and he will, because he's got too much love not to, don't let him hide behind rules and fear. Make him fight for it. Make him remember that love is worth the risk. Maggie's eyes held certainty. She wanted you happy, Danny boy. Wanted you to build a life after she was gone. This Kate woman, she makes you happy. Terrified mostly, but yeah, underneath the fear, there's something that feels like happiness. Then you fight for her, for you, for Sophie, who deserves to see her daddy actually living. Maggie stood ruffling Sophie's hair on her way to the door. Sarah fought cancer knowing she'd lose. The least you can do is fight for love when you might actually win. Dan pulled out his phone, typed a message before courage could desert him. I'm not giving up on this, on us. If you need time, take it, but know that I'm here when you're ready. Catherine's response came an hour later. I'm not ready, but I want to be. Give me a week. 7 days stretched like eternity. Dan threw himself into work, maintaining scrupulous professionalism with Catherine, while watching her retreat behind walls that grew higher with each passing day. She stopped eating lunch at her desk, started arriving earlier, and leaving later, the Ice Queen reasserting control mound over the woman who'd briefly let herself hope. Friday afternoon, 1 week exactly from their conversation, Catherine summoned him to her office. Dan's heart hammered as he knocked uncertainty, making his palms sweat. She stood at the window, backlit by autumn afternoon sun. When she turned, her expression carried resolution that made his stomach drop. I've made a decision. About us, about the company, about everything. Catherine's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. I'm resigning as CEO, effective 30 days from today. The world tilted sideways. What? No, Kate, you can't. I can and I am. I've spent 5 years building Meridian while forgetting to build a life. Cancer taught me survival, but you taught me the difference between surviving and living. She moved toward him, her eyes bright with tears she refused to let fall. I choose living. I choose you and Sophie and the possibility of something more than corporate success. But this company is your legacy. My legacy is supposed to be more than quarterly earnings. She took his hands, her grip firm despite the fear he could see in every line of her body. I want family, connection, someone who sees me as Kate instead of the Ice Queen. You offered me that, and I'm terrified of taking it, but I'm more terrified of dying alone with nothing but an impressive resume. Dan pulled her close, felt her resistance melt as she buried her face in his shoulder. You don't have to give up everything for this. For me. I'm not giving up. I'm choosing differently. Her voice was muffled against his shirt. Robert will make an excellent CEO. The board trusts him. And I'll consult part-time, stay involved without the pressure. But mostly I want to learn how to be human again. How to have people in my life who matter more than market share. What if you regret it? Then I'll deal with that. But I know I'll regret not trying, not taking this chance. She pulled back, looking at him with eyes that held more vulnerability than he'd ever seen. I'm falling in love with you, Daniel Carter. Terrified, messy, probably too fast, but falling nonetheless. And I'd rather risk my heart than play it safe and spend the rest of my life wondering what if. He kissed her then properly this time. Not desperate or rushed, but deliberate, pouring 3 years of grief and isolation and unexpected hope into contact. She kissed him back with the intensity of someone who'd forgotten what connection felt like and was rediscovering its power. When they finally broke apart, Catherine rested her forehead against his. One condition, Sophie has to approve. I won't insert myself into her life if she's not ready. She asked me last week if we were friends. Said you had sad eyes like mine, but smiled when you looked at her. Dan's voice roughened with emotion. She's already hoping you'll stick around. Then I guess I'd better not disappoint her. They spent the next hour planning logistics. Catherine's resignation announcement, the transition period, how to handle office gossip during the month before she officially left. By the time Dan emerged from her office, the sun had set and the building had emptied except for security and the eternally present Marcus Webb. Marcus intercepted him at the elevators, his expression twisted with vindication. Heard she's resigning. Guess sleeping with the boss has consequences after all. Dan's fist connected with Marcus's jaw before conscious thought engaged. The man went down hard, shock and pain written across his features. Dan stood over him, knuckles throbbing, 3 years of suppressed rage finally finding outlet. Her name is Catherine. She survived cancer alone while you complained about not getting promotions you didn't earn. She built this company from nothing while fighting for her life, and she's worth 100 of you. His voice came out deadly calm. If I ever hear you disrespect her again, this will seem gentle. Are we clear? Marcus nodded, cradling his jaw. Bravado evaporated in the face of genuine fury. Security escorted Dan from the building. Assault on company property, even justified, had consequences. He sat in his car, hands shaking from adrenaline come down, and called Catherine. I just punched Marcus Webb. Her laughter came through the phone, genuine and surprised. Please tell me you broke his nose. Just his pride, I think. Security's probably reporting it to HR as we speak. I'll handle it. He's been harassing employees for months. This just gives me excuse to document it officially. Her voice softened. Thank you for defending me. No one's done that in a very long time. Get used to it. I'm not going anywhere. Good, because I'm cooking dinner tomorrow night. You, me, and Sophie, at my place. Fair warning, I haven't cooked for anyone in years, so expectations should be appropriately low. Dan smiled despite the throbbing in his knuckles. We'll bring dessert. Sophie makes excellent brownies if you don't mind raw batter and excessive chocolate chips. Sounds perfect. Saturday evening found them in Catherine's Gold Coast penthouse. Sophie wide-eyed at floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. Catherine had clearly stressed over dinner, too many dishes for 3 people, half of them slightly burned or oversalted. But the effort mattered more than execution, and Sophie declared everything delicious with the generosity of children who recognize genuine trying. After dinner, Sophie curled up on the couch between them, Catherine's teddy bear clutched close. Kate, can I ask you something? Of course, sweetheart. Are you going to be Daddy's girlfriend? Catherine's eyes met Dan's over Sophie's head, question and hope mingling. He nodded slightly, her choice, but he was all in. I'd like to be, if that's okay with you. Sophie considered this with 6-year-old seriousness. Will you make Daddy smile more? He's been sad since Mommy died. I'll try my very best. And will you come to my soccer games? I'm starting soccer now instead of ballet. Every single one. Okay then, you can be his girlfriend. Sophie yawned, already drowsy from dinner and the late hour. But you have to promise not to leave like Mommy did. Daddy's heart can't break anymore. The simple wisdom of it nearly broke them both. Catherine's voice shook when she answered. I promise to do everything I can to stay. Is that enough? Uh-huh. Sophie snuggled closer. You're nice and you have sad eyes, but Daddy makes them less sad. So you should be together. Dan carried Sophie to the guest room when she fell asleep, tucked her in with practice efficiency. When he returned, Catherine stood at the window, arms wrapped around herself, like she could hold her pieces together through sheer will. She's amazing, so wise for someone so small. Kids who lose parents grow up fast. He joined her at the window, the city lights stretching to the horizon. You okay? Terrified, happy, completely out of my depth. Catherine leaned into him when he wrapped his arms around her from behind. I don't know how to do this, Daniel. How to be someone's girlfriend, she stumbled over the word, someone's potential stepmother. I don't have a roadmap for this. Neither do I. We'll figure it out together. He pressed a kiss to her temple. One day at a time. No pressure, no expectations. Just 3 broken people trying to heal each other. She turned in his arms, her hands coming up to frame his face. I love you. I know it's too soon, too fast, but I need you to know. In case I panic and pull away, I need you to remember I said this when I was brave enough. I love you too, broken scars and all. They kissed while the city glowed below them, 2 people who'd survived loss and learned to hide behind walls, finally risking the vulnerability that came with connection. It wasn't perfect, nothing about them was, but it was real and honest, and more than either had hoped for in the darkness of their separate griefs. Monday would bring challenges. Catherine's resignation would shock Meridian, and the gossip would intensify before it faded. But standing in her penthouse with Sophie sleeping in the next room, and Dan's arms around her waist, Catherine Williams finally understood what she'd been fighting cancer to protect, not her career or her reputation, but the possibility of moments exactly like this. Ordinary, human, worth surviving for. Catherine's resignation announcement hit Meridian like a controlled detonation. The board convened an emergency meeting. Within hours, Chairman Douglas Pierce's fury radiating through closed doors while employees whispered in clusters, speculation running wild. Dan kept his head down at his desk, painfully aware that every eye tracked his movements, measuring his reaction for proof of the rumors they'd been spreading for weeks. Robert Hayes emerged from the boardroom at 3:30, his weathered face carrying satisfaction despite the chaos. He stopped at Dan's cubicle, voice low enough that only he could hear. "They're making me interim CEO. Catherine recommended me before she even submitted her resignation." His eyes held knowledge that went deeper than corporate politics. "She's doing this for you. Don't make her regret it." "I won't." "Good, because she's terrified right now, even if she won't show it. Giving up the only identity she's known for a decade that takes courage most people don't have." Robert's hand landed heavy on Dan's shoulder. "Take care of her. She deserves someone who sees her as more than a cancer survivor or a corporate machine." The weight of responsibility settled like a stone in Dan's chest. Catherine was risking everything on the possibility that what they had could become something real, something lasting. He couldn't let her down. Jennifer Brooks summoned him at 4 o'clock, her expression carefully neutral as she gestured to the chair across from her desk. "I assume you know why Ms. Williams resigned." No point in lying now. She wanted a life outside Meridian, decided to take it. And her sudden interest in work-life balance, flexible hours, and personal relationships had nothing to do with you. Jennifer's tone remained professional, but her eyes held knowing. "I'm not stupid, Dan. I've been in HR for 15 years. I know what this looks like. What do you want me to say?" "The truth would be nice." She leaned back, studying him. "Did you pursue a romantic relationship with your CEO while she was your direct supervisor?" "No, she restructured reporting before anything personal happened. Everything between us developed after Robert became my mentor." Technically true, even if the timeline was generous. "We followed protocol. And the fact that she's now leaving the company, that's coincidence. That's her choice, one she made for herself, not because of pressure or coercion or anything inappropriate." Dan met Jennifer's gaze steadily. "She wants a life beyond these walls. I can't fault her for that." Jennifer was quiet for a long moment, her fingers steepled beneath her chin. Finally, she sighed. "I believe you, mostly. But understand, if this relationship falls apart and Catherine tries to claim hostile work environment or constructive dismissal, this conversation will be evidence that you knew exactly what you were doing. It won't fall apart." "You sound very sure for someone who's known her less than 2 months in any personal capacity." "Sometimes you just know." Dan stood, sensing the conversation's end. "Is there anything else?" "Just this: be worth it. Whatever she's giving up, make sure you're worth the sacrifice." The same responsibility Robert had laid on him doubled now. Catherine was betting her entire professional identity on the belief that they could build something together. He couldn't afford to fail her. That evening, Dan found Catherine on her penthouse balcony, Chicago's autumn wind whipping her hair as she stared out at Lake Michigan. She'd changed from her suit into jeans and an oversized sweater, the casual clothes making her seem younger, more vulnerable. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, feeling her tension melt slightly at his touch. "Rough day. The board tried to convince me to stay. Offered me a raise, more equity, anything if I'd reconsider." Her voice carried exhaustion that went bone deep. "Douglas Pierce actually said I was being irrational, letting emotion override good business sense." "What did you tell him?" "That maybe emotion is good business sense. That a CEO who's dead inside can't lead a company full of living people." She turned in his arms, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. "He called me weak, said I was throwing away everything for a man I barely know." Dan's jaw tightened. "Want me to punch him too?" That earned a watery laugh. "Tempting, but assault charges wouldn't help your custody case if Sophie's school found out." "Fair point." He cupped her face, thumbs brushing her cheekbones. "Do you regret it, the resignation?" "Ask me in a month. Right now, I'm terrified I've made the biggest mistake of my life." Her honesty cut straight through any platitudes he might have offered. "I've been Catherine Williams' CEO for so long, I don't know who Kate is without the title. What if I'm boring? What if I have nothing to offer except spreadsheets and strategic planning? Then we'll find out together, build something new." He kissed her forehead, her nose, her lips. You survived cancer, Kate. You can survive a career change. Cancer had clear protocols, treatment plans, survival statistics defined outcomes. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. This relationship, family happiness, there's no roadmap. No guarantee I won't screw it up completely. Welcome to being human. Nobody has guarantees. She rested her forehead against his chest, breathing deeply. Sophie called earlier, asked if I wanted to come to her soccer game Saturday. First one of the season. Dan's heart stuttered. What did you say? That I'd be there, front row, embarrassing jersey and all. Catherine pulled back her expression, shifting to something that looked like cautious hope. Is that okay? I don't want to overstep, but she invited me and it's more than okay, it's perfect. He meant it. Sophie reaching out, Catherine showing up. These were the moments that built families from fragments. Fair warning, 6-year-old soccer is mostly chaos and grass-stained knees. Not exactly strategic planning. I could use some chaos. My life's been too controlled for too long. They stood on the balcony as darkness settled over Chicago, two people learning to build something neither had attempted before. The city lights spread beneath them like promises, fragile, beautiful, worth fighting for, despite the risk of shattering. Saturday brought unseasonable warmth and a soccer field full of small bodies chasing a ball with more enthusiasm than coordination. Catherine arrived wearing jeans and a navy hoodie, her hair in a ponytail, looking nothing like the Ice Queen who'd terrified Meridian's corridors. Sophie spotted her immediately and waved with such fierce excitement she nearly crashed into another player. Maggie materialized at Dan's elbow, watching Catherine navigate the bleachers with the careful precision of someone entering unfamiliar territory. She showed up. You sound surprised. Rich women don't usually slum it at youth soccer games. They send nannies. Maggie's sharp eyes tracked Catherine settling beside Dan, the careful space she left between them, conscious of public scrutiny. But she's not here as a rich woman, is she? She's here as someone trying to belong. Catherine caught Sophie's eye and gave an enthusiastic thumbs up that made the little girl beam. I don't know the rules. Is it bad that number 7 keeps hogging the ball? That's Marcus Webb's daughter. Dan couldn't help the edge in his voice. And yes, terrible sportsmanship, but 6-year-olds haven't learned teamwork yet. Marcus himself sat 3 rows down, his jaw still carrying a faint bruise from Dan's fist. He turned, caught sight of Catherine, and his expression twisted into something ugly. She met his gaze steadily, unflinching, until he looked away. Did you really punch him? He disrespected you. It seemed appropriate. Catherine's hand found his beneath the bleacher bench, fingers lacing together. My hero. The game devolved into expected chaos, goals scored accidentally, tears over minor collisions, parents shouting contradictory instructions from the sidelines. Sophie played with fierce determination, her small face scrunched in concentration every time the ball came near. When she finally scored a lucky kick that bounced off 2 defenders before trickling into the goal, Catherine was on her feet, cheering before Dan could react. Sophie ran to the sidelines during halftime, grass-stained and glowing. Did you see? Did you see my goal? You were amazing. Catherine knelt down, heedless of the dirt, meeting Sophie at eye level. Best goal I've ever seen. Really. Absolutely, though full disclosure, this is my first soccer game ever, so the competition isn't steep. Sophie giggled, then surprised them both by throwing her arms around Catherine's neck. I'm glad you came. It's more fun when there's lots of people cheering. Catherine's eyes went bright with tears. She blinked away quickly. Me too, sweetheart. Wouldn't want to be anywhere else. After the game, a tied score that satisfied everyone and disappointed no one, they went for ice cream at Sophie's insistence. Catherine let Sophie order whatever she wanted, indulging her with the generosity of someone discovering the joy of spoiling a child. Dan watched them together, his heart doing complicated things in his chest. You're good with her. I'm winging it completely. Is that normal? Catherine had chocolate ice cream on her nose, completely oblivious. I feel like I should have studied parenting books or something. Nobody knows what they're doing. We're all just making it up as we go. Dan reached over, wiping the chocolate away with his thumb. But you're doing great. Sophie's not an easy audience. If she didn't like you, she'd let you know. Kids are honest like that. Catherine watched Sophie attack her sundae with single-minded focus. Must be terrifying being responsible for shaping another human. Completely, but also the best thing I've ever done. He paused, measuring his next words. Kate, I need to ask you something. Where do you see this going, us, I mean? She stiffened, slightly ice cream forgotten. That's a big question for a first soccer game. Sophie's getting attached. I'm getting attached. I need to know you're in this for real, not just experimenting with normal life because the corporate world burned you out. Catherine set down her spoon carefully, her gray eyes finding his. I'm terrified this won't work. That I'll screw it up, or you'll realize I'm too damaged, or Sophie will decide she doesn't want a replacement mother. But I'm here, Daniel, really here, not experimenting, investing, even though it's scary. Especially because it's scary. The things worth having usually are. She reached for his hand across the table. I'm not Sarah. I can't replace what you lost, and I won't try. But I can be someone who shows up, who cares, who fights for this family we're trying to build. If you'll let me. Dan brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles. I'm all in, if you are. Then we're doing this, whatever this becomes. Sophie looked up from her ice cream, catching the moment between them. Are you guys being mushy gross? They laughed, the tension breaking. But underneath the humor, Dan felt something shift, a commitment forming, fragile but real. They were choosing each other despite every rational reason to run from the complications. 3 weeks into Catherine's notice period brought the health scare that nearly destroyed everything they'd built. She'd gone for her routine oncology checkup at Northwestern, annual mammogram, and bloodwork standard monitoring for breast cancer survivors. Dan had offered to accompany her, but she'd waved him off years of solo medical appointments, making her resistant to support she didn't know how to accept. The voicemail came while he was in a meeting with Robert about the Henderson account's final stages. Catherine's voice carefully controlled, but with an edge of panic underneath. Dr. Martinez wants me to come back in. They found something on the scan. I'm going in tomorrow for a biopsy. Thought you should know. Dan's world tilted sideways. He excused himself from the meeting, ignoring Robert's concerned expression, and called Catherine back immediately. It went to voicemail. He tried again. Again. On the 4th attempt, she picked up. I'm fine. You're not fine. What did the doctor say exactly? Shadow on the mammogram. Could be scar tissue from radiation. Could be calcification. Could be... Her voice cracked. Could be cancer again. They won't know until the biopsy. I'm coming over. No, I need to process this alone. Wow. Kate, you don't have to. Yes, I do. This is my thing, my fight. I've done it alone before. I can do it again. The walls were going up, fear driving her back into isolation that had kept her alive but lonely. I'll call you after the biopsy. She hung up before he could argue. Dan stood in Meridian's hallway, his phone clutched in a white-knuckle grip, and felt 3 years of grief come roaring back. Sarah's diagnosis, the desperate hope, followed by crushing disappointment, watching her slip away despite every prayer and promise. He couldn't do that again. Couldn't watch another woman he loved fight cancer. But Catherine wasn't Sarah. And unlike Sarah, she was pushing him away instead of pulling him close. Maggie found him that evening, sitting in the dark, Sophie already asleep. The old woman settled beside him without preamble, her silence more comforting than platitudes. The cancer's back. Maybe, they don't know yet, biopsy tomorrow. And she's doing it alone. That's what she says. Dan scrubbed his face with both hands. I can't lose someone else to cancer, Maggie. I can't watch it happen again. Then don't watch, fight. Maggie's voice held steel beneath the sympathy. Sarah had to go through it, no choice in the matter. But Kate, she's choosing to face it alone because she doesn't know how to do it any other way. Your job is to show her different. She won't let me. So you push, gently but firmly. You show up whether she wants you to or not, because that's what love does. It shows up. Maggie stood, her hand brief on his shoulder. Sarah fought hard as she could. Kate needs to know she doesn't have to fight alone. The biopsy was scheduled for 10 in the morning at Northwestern Memorial. Dan called in sick first time in 6 years and showed up in the waiting room at 9:30. Catherine emerged from the elevator at 9:45, stopping short when she saw him. I told you not to come. I know, I came anyway. He stood, closing the distance between them. You can be angry about it later. Right now, I'm here. Her face crumpled for just a second before the mask slammed back into place. I don't need you to hold my hand through medical procedures. Maybe not, but I need to hold yours. Dan took her hand despite her resistance. I lost Sarah to cancer. Watched her go through hell and I couldn't fix it, couldn't save her. I won't watch you go through that alone just because you're too scared to ask for help. I'm not scared. You're terrified, so am I. Difference is I'm not letting fear make me stupid. He pulled her into his arms, felt her resistance collapse as she buried her face in his shoulder. Let me be here, Kate, please. She nodded against his chest, her hands fisting in his jacket. They sat together in the waiting room, her palm pressed to his, both of them silent with a fear too big for words. When the nurse called her name, Catherine stood with visible effort. Come with me. Those 3 words cost her everything, admitting vulnerability, accepting help, trusting someone else with her fear. Dan would have walked through fire for less. The biopsy itself was clinical and quick, but the 7-day wait for results stretched like torture. Catherine pulled away emotionally, disappearing into herself in ways that terrified Dan more than the cancer scare. She stopped answering texts, canceled their dinner plans, even skipped Sophie's soccer game with a terse message about not feeling well. Sophie noticed immediately. Where's Kate? Is she mad at us? She's scared princess. Sometimes when grown-ups are scared, they hide. That's dumb. When I'm scared, I want you to hug me. Sophie's 6-year-old logic cut straight to the heart of it. You should go hug Kate so she's not scared anymore. Dan tried, showed up at Catherine's penthouse with soup and stupid optimism, only to be turned away at the door. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow, and she wouldn't meet his gaze. I can't do this right now. Can't be what you need while I'm falling apart. I don't need you to be anything except honest. Let me in, Kate. What if it's cancer? What if I have to do chemo again? Radiation surgery? I won't put you through that. Won't make Sophie watch another mother figure die. Her voice broke on the words. It's better if we end this now before you're in too deep. The casual dismissal of everything they'd built hit like a punch to the gut. Dan forced himself to stay calm, to see past the fear to the terror driving her retreat. You don't get to make that choice for me. For us. He stepped forward despite her attempt to close the door. I'm already in too deep, Kate. So is Sophie. You don't protect us by pushing us away. You just hurt us differently. I'm trying to save you from watching me die. And I'm trying to save you from dying alone. Dan's voice cracked with frustration and fear, and love too big to contain. 3 years ago, I held my wife while she slipped away. It was hell. Worst thing I've ever experienced. But you know what would have been worse, not being there. Not holding her hand, not making sure she knew she was loved until the very last second. Catherine's composure shattered, tears streaming down her face. I'm so scared. I know. Me too. He pulled her into his arms, felt her shake with sobs she'd been holding back for days. But we're scared together, okay? You don't have to be strong right now. You just have to let me be strong for both of us. She clung to him like a drowning woman, all her carefully constructed armor dissolving in the face of genuine terror. They sank to the floor in her entryway, Dan's back against the wall, while Catherine buried her face in his chest and cried out 3.5 years of suppressed fear. Fear of recurrence, of dying alone, of finally finding something worth living for, only to have it ripped away by the disease she'd thought she'd beaten. What if I can't survive it again? What if this time I'm not lucky? Then we'll face it, together. Every appointment, every treatment, every terrifying moment. Dan pressed his lips to her hair, breathing her in. But Kate, you don't know it's cancer yet. Could be scar tissue, calcification, any number of benign things. Don't borrow tomorrow's grief. Trying not to, but my brain keeps going to worst-case scenarios. That's trauma. Your body remembers being betrayed, so it's preparing for betrayal again. He pulled back enough to see her face, wiping away tears with gentle thumbs. But you're not alone this time. Whatever the results say, you have me. You have Sophie. You have Maggie and Robert and people who give a damn whether you live or die. Catherine's laugh was watery broken. How do you know what to say? I don't. I'm making it up as I go, same as you. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. But I mean it, Kate. All in remember sickness, health terrifying, biopsies. I'm not going anywhere. She stayed in his arms while the sun set over Lake Michigan, her breathing eventually steadying as exhaustion claimed the adrenaline that had been keeping her upright. Dan held her, memorizing the weight of her against his chest, the smell of her shampoo, the way her fingers curled into his shirt. If the worst happened, if cancer had returned, he'd need these memories to hold on to in the dark days ahead. But he refused to believe it, refused to accept that the universe would be cruel enough to give them this chance at happiness, only to rip it away. Catherine had survived once. She'd survive again if she had to. And this time, she wouldn't do it alone. The call came 5 days later while Dan was making dinner, Sophie setting the table with elaborate care. His phone lit up with Catherine's name and his heart seized. He answered on the first ring. "It's benign." Her voice shook with relief so profound it was almost grief. "Scar tissue from radiation, not cancer. I'm still in remission." Dan's knees gave out, sending him sliding down the kitchen cabinet to sit hard on the floor. "You're okay." "I'm okay, Daniel, I'm okay." She was crying again, but this time with joy. "I get to stay, get to be here with you, with Sophie. I get to live." "Thank God." He couldn't stop the tears, didn't try. "Thank God, Kate." Sophie appeared at his side, her small face creased with worry. "Daddy, what's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, Princess. Everything's right. Kate's okay, she's not sick." Sophie's smile could have lit Chicago. "Can I talk to her?" Dan handed over the phone, watching his daughter's animated conversation with the woman who'd somehow become essential to their tiny family. When Sophie finally handed back the phone, Catherine's voice was thick with emotion. "She told me she's been making me get well cards every day. Has a whole stack ready just in case." "That's Sophie, heart bigger than sense." "I want to see them, see you both. Can I come over?" "We'd like that. Sophie's setting the table for 3. I think she knew you'd show up." Catherine arrived 45 minutes later, still in her hospital clothes, her face makeup-free and beautiful in its relief. Sophie tackled her at the door, hugging her with the fierce intensity of someone who'd been holding their breath and finally exhaled. "I'm so glad you're not sick. I was worried you'd leave like Mommy did." Catherine knelt down eye level with Sophie, her hands gentle on the little girl's shoulders. "I'm not going anywhere, sweetheart. I promise I'll do everything in my power to stay right here with you and your dad. Forever. As close to forever as I can manage." Sophie seemed satisfied with that, presenting Catherine with a stack of construction paper cards decorated with crayon drawings and elaborate glitter work. Catherine examined each one with the gravity it deserved, her eyes growing suspiciously bright. "These are the most beautiful get well cards I've ever received. Can I keep them?" "Uh-huh. To remember that people love you when you're Sriran." The simple wisdom of it broke something open in Catherine's chest. She pulled Sophie into another hug, this one lasting longer, meaning more. "Thank you, Sophie, for loving me even when I was too scared to let you." Dinner was chaotic and perfect, Sophie chattering about school, Catherine still shaky with relief, Dan watching his 2 favorite people, and feeling grateful in ways that defied language. After Sophie went to bed, he and Catherine stood on his small apartment balcony, her back pressed to his chest, his arms wrapped around her waist. "I'm sorry I pulled away. Let fear keep me stupid, like you said." "You were terrified. That makes people do irrational things." Dan kissed the top of her head. "But Kate, if something like this happens again, and it might because cancer survivors live with that sword hanging over them, you can't shut me out. We face it together, or we don't face it at all." "Together." She turned in his arms, her gray eyes holding certainty that had been missing during the long wait. "I love you, Daniel Carter. Messy, terrified, completely out of my depth, love you. And I want to build a life with you and Sophie if you'll have me. We'll have you, both of us, for as long as you'll stick around. How about forever? I know I promised Sophie, but I want to promise you too." Catherine's voice steadied with each word. "I want to be part of this family. Want to go to soccer games and help with homework and have dinner at 6:30 like normal people. Want to wake up next to you and go to sleep knowing someone cares if I make it through the night." Dan cupped her face, thumbs brushing her cheekbones. "Are you proposing to me, Ms. Williams?" "Maybe I am. Would you say yes? Ask me properly and find out." Catherine laughed, the sound free and genuine. "I don't have a ring. Didn't plan this." "Don't care about the ring. Care about the intention." She took his hands in hers, her expression shifting to something solemn and sacred. "Daniel Carter, will you marry me? Will you let me be Sophie's mom? Your wife, part of this beautiful broken family you've built. Will you take a chance on a cancer survivor with control issues and a terrible track record for work-life balance? Yes, to all of it. He kissed her, thoroughly sealing the promise. On one condition. Name it. Sophie has to approve. We ask her together, make sure she's ready for this. Catherine nodded, tears spilling over. Deal. They told Sophie the next morning over pancakes. Dan had worried about how to phrase it, but Catherine surprised him by letting the 6-year-old lead the conversation. Sophie, can I ask you something important? Sure. How would you feel if I married your daddy, if I became part of your family officially? Sophie considered this with the gravity of someone making a life-altering decision. Would you be my mom then? I could be if you wanted. Not to replace your real mom, she'll always be your mom. But I could be Mom Kate like you've been calling me, if that's okay. And you'd live with us. Eventually, yes. We'd find a place big enough for all of us together. With a room for me and maybe a dog, Catherine and Dan exchanged glances. A dog wasn't part of the negotiation, princess. But Mom Kate said yes to marrying you. That means she has to say yes to a dog too. Those are the rules. Sophie's logic was irrefutable in her own mind. Catherine laughed. Okay, a small dog. One that doesn't shed too much. Sophie whooped, then launched herself at Catherine, nearly knocking her chair over. You're going to be my new mom. I have a mom again. Dan watched them together, his heart so full it ached. 3 months ago, he'd been a widow drowning in grief and work his daughter slipping away from him one missed recital at a time. Now he had Catherine, brilliant, damaged, learning to be human, and Sophie had her smile back, and they were building something neither of them had thought possible. That evening, after Sophie finally crashed from excitement, Dan pulled out his laptop and started researching engagement rings. Catherine found him an hour later, peering over his shoulder at the options displayed on screen. What are you doing? You proposed. I'm accepting properly. That requires a ring. He pulled her onto his lap, her back to his chest. What do you like, traditional diamond or something different? I don't care about the ring. I care about what it represents. Humor me. I want to get this right. Catherine studied the screen, her fingers hovering over a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds. This one, blue like Lake Michigan, reminds me of the night we admitted we loved each other. Dan ordered it immediately, overnight shipping despite the cost. It'll be here tomorrow. Then I'm proposing properly, down on one knee and everything. You're ridiculous. I already proposed to you. So, now it's my turn. He kissed her neck, feeling her shiver. Besides, Sophie deserves to see her dad do something romantic. Set the bar for whatever partner she chooses later. Teaching her standards through example. I like it. The ring arrived at noon the next day. Dan waited until evening, until Sophie was home from school, and they'd finished dinner. He got down on one knee in their tiny living room, the ring box open in his palm, while Sophie watched with barely contained excitement. Catherine Williams, you proposed to me yesterday and I said yes. But I want to ask you properly, will you marry me? Will you be my wife, Sophie's mom, the person who makes our house a home? Will you take on two people who are still figuring out how to heal from grief and build joy in its place? Catherine's hands flew to her mouth, tears already falling. Yes, always yes. He slid the ring onto her finger. Perfect fit, the sapphire catching light and throwing it back in shades of blue that matched her eyes when she was happy. Sophie cheered, running over to examine the ring with 6-year-old fascination. It's so pretty. Can I be the flower girl at the wedding? Wouldn't dream of having anyone else. Catherine pulled Sophie onto her lap, Dan settling beside them on the couch. We're a family now, official and everything. They spent the evening planning a wedding that Sophie insisted needed 1,000,000 flowers and cake as tall as Daddy. Catherine indulged every ridiculous request with the patience of someone discovering the joy of including a child in adult decisions. Dan watched them negotiate details, his fiancée and his daughter, and felt the last pieces of his broken heart finally start to knit together. The wedding itself happened 3 months later. Small ceremony at the courthouse with Maggie, Robert Hayes, Amy Richardson, and a handful of close friends witnessing. Sophie wore a blue dress that matched Catherine's ring and took her flower girl duties seriously enough to make the judge smile. When the officiant pronounced them married, Sophie cheered before anyone else rushing to hug them both. Now you're Mom Kate forever. Forever and always, sweetheart. They moved into a townhouse in Lincoln Park shortly after, big enough for all of them, with a yard for the small terrier Sophie immediately named Professor Wagglesworth, despite his complete lack of dignity. Catherine threw herself into learning domesticity with the same intensity she'd once applied to corporate strategy, cooking disasters that they ate anyway, homework, help sessions that sometimes left them all confused, soccer practices where she cheered too loud and embarrassed Sophie with her enthusiasm. She started consulting part-time, working from home, with flexible hours that let her actually be present. Robert flourished as Meridian's CEO, the company thriving under leadership that valued humans over metrics. Marcus Webb eventually transferred to the New York office, unable to handle working for someone he'd dismissed as too emotional for business. 6 months into marriage brought Catherine's follow-up oncology appointment. Dan accompanied her to Northwestern, both of them tense despite the benign biopsy from months earlier. Cancer was a shadow that never fully lifted, a possibility that colored every checkup with fear. Dr. Martinez smiled as she reviewed the scans. Clear. Everything looks excellent, Catherine. Still in full remission, no signs of recurrence. The relief was familiar now, but no less profound. Catherine squeezed Dan's hand hard enough to hurt her eyes bright. Thank you. We'll keep up with annual screenings, maintain your current medication regimen, and call immediately if anything changes. Dr. Martinez closed the file, her expression warm. You're one of my success stories, Catherine. Enjoy your life. They celebrated with ice cream tradition, now Sophie's insistence that good news required frozen dairy products having become family law. Catherine sat between Dan and Sophie, chocolate ice cream on her nose again, and felt the weight of survival settle into something that felt like joy. Mom, Kate, can we get another dog? Professor Wagglesworth needs a friend. One dog, Sophie. That was the deal. But Mom, you love me. That means you have to say yes to important things. Catherine looked at Dan, saw his barely suppressed smile. Your daughter is manipulating me. Yep, she's good at it. Wonder where she learned that. Definitely not from the woman who negotiated billion-dollar deals for a living. Catherine kissed the top of Sophie's head. Nice try, sweetheart. Ask me again in a year. That's almost like a yes. That's a firm maybe that will probably become a no. But Sophie was already planning her campaign, strategizing with the determination of someone who'd learned from the best. Dan watched his wife and daughter negotiate the theoretical second dog and marveled at how completely his life had transformed from that mortifying Friday afternoon when he'd accidentally seen his boss's scars. Those scars had led to this laughter over ice cream, a child who felt safe enough to be demanding a partner, who'd learned that vulnerability wasn't weakness, but the foundation of everything that mattered. Catherine had survived cancer only to discover she'd been dying slowly anyway, smothered by isolation and fear. Now she was alive in all the ways that counted. That evening, after Sophie crashed from sugar and excitement, Dan and Catherine stood on their small deck overlooking the neighborhood. Autumn was settling into Chicago again, the air carrying hints of winter while leaves turned gold and red. She leaned against him, his arms wrapped around her waist, both of them quiet with contentment. Do you ever think about that day, the incident? Sometimes. Wonder what would have happened if I'd waited outside like I should have. We wouldn't be here. Wouldn't have this. Catherine turned in his arms, her gray eyes holding certainty. I spent 3 years fighting cancer, and another 3 building walls so high I couldn't see over them. Then you accidentally saw me at my most vulnerable, and somehow that broke through every defense I'd constructed. Funny how the worst moments can lead to the best outcomes. The worst moment was cancer. You were the best moment disguised as the worst. She kissed him softly. Thank you for not running when you saw my scars, for seeing past them to the person underneath. Thank you for letting me, for choosing to live instead of just survive. They stood together while the city settled into evening, two people who'd learned that healing required more courage than surviving. That letting someone see your scars, literal and metaphorical, was terrifying, but necessary. That family could be built from broken pieces if you were brave enough to admit you couldn't do it alone. Sophie's voice drifted from her window above them, singing herself to sleep with off-key enthusiasm. Catherine smiled, resting her head on Dan's shoulder. We did good, didn't we? With her, with us, with everything. We did great, and we're just getting started. forever, as close to forever as we can manage. The city lights spread below them, Chicago glowing with possibility. Catherine Williams. Carter had survived cancer, resigned from her CEO position, married a widower with a 6-year-old daughter, and somehow found that life outside corporate walls was infinitely richer than anything she'd built inside them. Dan Carter had stopped hiding behind work long enough to realize grief didn't mean he had to stop living. And Sophie had a family again, imperfect, unconventional, built from loss and risk and the courage to be vulnerable. In the morning, there would be soccer practice and consulting calls and negotiations about hypothetical second dogs. But tonight, they stood together on their deck, three broken people who'd somehow become whole by admitting they needed each other. The scars remained: Catherine's from cancer, Dan's from grief, Sophie's from too early loss. But scars were proof of survival, evidence of battles fought and won. And sometimes the most embarrassing moments led to the most beautiful lives if you were brave enough to let them.